Please move him somewhere else." The words were spoken softly, but inside the first-class cabin, they landed like a thunderclap. Conversation stopped. A businessman lowered his tablet. A flight attendant froze for half a second. Even the gentle hum of the aircraft seemed quieter. Claire Montgomery stood beside her seat with one arm wrapped protectively around her young daughter. She wore an elegant cream-colored blazer, designer jewelry, and the kind of confidence that came from years of being one of the most powerful executives in the country. Her gaze remained fixed on the large black man seated beside the window. Dr. Marcus Bennett looked up slowly from the book resting in his hands. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, dressed in a simple gray sweatshirt and dark jeans. A worn backpack sat beneath the seat in front of him. Nothing about his appearance suggested wealth or influence. To most people, he looked like an ordinary traveler returning home after a long week. The flight attendant approached carefully. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" Claire glanced briefly at Marcus before answering. "I would prefer another seating arrangement." The attendant hesitated. "This is his assigned seat." Claire tightened her jaw. "Then perhaps another seat can be found." Around them, several passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Marcus remained silent. He closed his book and gently placed a bookmark between the pages. Outside the aircraft window, the late afternoon sun painted the clouds with streaks of gold and orange. The runway stretched endlessly below. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Marcus stood. "It is fine," he said calmly. "I can sit somewhere else." His voice was steady and polite. There was no anger, no argument, no attempt to embarrass anyone. The flight attendant looked apologetic. "Sir, you do not have to move." Marcus offered a small smile. "I know." He reached for his backpack and stepped into the aisle. Claire visibly relaxed. Beside her, 10-year-old Emma watched the scene unfold with growing confusion. She looked from her mother to Marcus and back again. Something about the situation did not make sense to her. As Marcus moved down the aisle, Emma accidentally dropped a small notebook from her lap. It slid across the carpet and stopped near his feet. Marcus bent down, picked it up, and brushed away a bit of dust. The notebook cover was decorated with colorful drawings and stickers. "I think this belongs to you," he said. Emma nodded shyly. "Thank you." Marcus smiled and handed it back. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a blue marker. "You might need this too." Emma accepted it with a surprised smile. Claire watched silently. Marcus simply nodded and continued toward the rear of the cabin. A few passengers followed him with their eyes. Others looked away, embarrassed by what they had just witnessed. Marcus eventually settled into a seat several rows behind first class. He placed his backpack beneath the seat, opened his book again, and returned to reading as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet while the airplane prepared for departure beneath the golden evening sky, nobody realized that the quiet man who had chosen dignity over confrontation was carrying a story far bigger than anyone in that cabin could imagine. As the aircraft climbed above the clouds and turned west toward California, the tension that had filled the first-class cabin slowly dissolved into a quiet uneasiness. Most passengers returned to their routines. Some opened laptops. Others settled beneath blankets and stared out at the endless sky. The engines produced a steady hum that blended with the soft glow of overhead lights. Several rows behind first class, Marcus Bennett sat comfortably beside the window. He seemed completely unaffected by what had happened. His backpack rested beneath the seat, and the book he had been reading lay open in his hands. Every few minutes, he would make a small note in the margin with a pen tucked inside the cover. There was something peaceful about him, the kind of calm that could not be purchased or taught. Across the cabin, Claire Montgomery focused on her tablet. Financial reports covered the screen. Revenue projections, investor presentations, upcoming acquisitions. She reviewed each document with the precision that had helped build her billion-dollar company. For Claire, every minute mattered. Every decision had consequences. Success was not simply a goal. It had become the foundation of her identity. Beside her, Emma tried to continue drawing in her notebook. The blue marker Marcus had given her moved across the page as she colored a small airplane flying above the clouds. After a few moments, she looked toward the rear of the cabin. "Mom." Claire barely looked up from her screen. "Yes." "Why did that man have to move?" Claire sighed softly. "Because I asked for a different seat." Emma thought about the answer. "But he was nice." Claire returned her attention to the tablet. Sometimes people are not exactly who they seem. Emma lowered her eyes. The response did not satisfy her. She remembered the way Marcus smiled when he handed back her notebook. She remembered how polite he sounded even after being asked to leave. The memory stayed with her. Several hours passed. Outside the windows, sunlight painted the clouds in brilliant shades of gold and orange. The sky looked almost endless. A flight attendant walked through the aisle distributing drinks and snacks. When she reached Marcus, she paused. "Would you like anything else, sir?" Marcus smiled warmly. "Just some water, thank you." As she handed him the bottle, an elderly passenger across the aisle accidentally dropped a small bag. It slipped beneath several seats. Before anyone else reacted, Marcus leaned forward, reached down, and carefully retrieved it. "Here you go." The elderly woman smiled with relief. "Thank you so much." "My pleasure." The exchange lasted only seconds, yet several nearby passengers noticed. Marcus returned to his book without expecting gratitude or attention. Meanwhile, Claire continued working, unaware that a young man seated several rows away had quietly uploaded a short video from before takeoff. The clip showed only a few minutes of what had happened. No dramatic commentary, no edits, just a simple recording of a man being asked to move and choosing kindness instead of confrontation. As the aircraft carried everyone toward Los Angeles, the video began gathering views. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. Yet inside the cabin, no one knew. The sun slowly drifted lower beyond the horizon, and Marcus Bennett remained exactly who he had been from the beginning, a man whose character spoke far louder than his appearance ever could. By the time the aircraft began its descent toward Los Angeles, darkness had settled beyond the windows. The city below glittered with thousands of lights stretching toward the horizon like a field of stars. Most passengers were gathering their belongings and preparing for arrival. Claire Montgomery closed her tablet and reviewed the schedule waiting for her the next morning. It was the most important week of her year. For nearly 18 months, her company had been negotiating a partnership that industry experts described as transformational. The agreement would open new healthcare markets across the country and secure hundreds of millions of dollars in future growth. Investors were watching closely. Financial reporters had already begun predicting success. Claire had spent months preparing for the final meeting. Failure was not something she allowed herself to consider. Across the cabin, Emma stared out the window as the city lights grew brighter beneath them. Her notebook rested on her lap. The blue marker Marcus had given her was tucked carefully inside the cover. Every so often she glanced toward the rear of the aircraft. She could still see Marcus sitting quietly by the window. He seemed completely relaxed. No phone calls. No complaints. No signs that he was carrying any frustration from what had happened earlier. The contrast lingered in her mind. The captain announced their final approach, and passengers straightened in their seats. Outside, the wing lights flashed against the darkness. The aircraft slowly descended through scattered clouds before touching down on the runway with a gentle vibration. Relief spread throughout the cabin. People stood, opened overhead bins, and reached for luggage. Claire immediately checked her phone. The screen illuminated with dozens of notifications. Emails, messages, meeting reminders. She barely glanced at them before continuing toward the exit. Her attention remained fixed on the business opportunities waiting ahead. Meanwhile, Marcus patiently allowed others to leave before stepping into the aisle. He retrieved his backpack and moved through the cabin at an unhurried pace. Near the exit, Emma spotted him once more. She offered a small wave. Marcus smiled and waved back before disappearing into the terminal crowd. Neither of them expected to see each other again. The airport buzzed with the familiar sounds of rolling suitcases, distant announcements, and travelers rushing toward their destinations. Claire and Emma entered a waiting car and disappeared into the Los Angeles night. Several miles away, Marcus arrived at a modest hotel near downtown. He checked in quietly and headed to his room. Before going to sleep, he opened his laptop and reviewed documents for a meeting scheduled the following day. Reports filled the screen. Community health initiatives, funding proposals, leadership assessments. He studied each page carefully before finally closing the computer. Outside his window, the city lights shimmered beneath the night sky. At that same moment, unknown to both of them, the video recorded on the airplane continued spreading across the internet. View counts climbed higher every hour. Comments multiplied. Journalists began taking notice. What had seemed like a brief encounter between strangers was quietly becoming something much larger. And by the time the sun rose over Los Angeles the next morning, the lives of Claire Montgomery and Marcus Bennett would be connected in ways neither one could possibly imagine. The next morning arrived wrapped in bright California sunlight. Claire Montgomery stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her luxury hotel suite overlooking downtown Los Angeles. The city below was already alive with movement. Cars flowed through the streets. Glass towers reflected the morning sun. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Claire adjusted her blazer and reviewed the agenda for the day one final time. The meeting scheduled for 10 o'clock was expected to secure the largest partnership in her company's history. Months of negotiations, presentations, and planning had led to this moment. Investors expected success. Board members expected success. Claire expected success. Failure did not seem like a realistic possibility. Across the city, Marcus Bennett sat alone at a small table inside a community center located in a quiet neighborhood. The building was modest. Children's artwork decorated the walls. Volunteers moved through the hallways carrying boxes of educational supplies. Marcus listened as local teachers discussed healthcare challenges facing low-income families. He took notes carefully and asked thoughtful questions. The atmosphere was calm, warm, and genuine. No cameras followed him. No reporters waited outside. The people in the room seemed to know him not as a powerful figure, but as someone who consistently showed up when help was needed. A little after 10 o'clock, Claire entered the headquarters of Pacific Health Alliance. The building rose high above the city skyline, its glass exterior shining beneath the morning sun. Executives greeted her warmly as she stepped into the lobby. Everything felt familiar, professional, controlled. She entered a large conference room overlooking Los Angeles. A polished table stretched across the room. Presentation screens glowed softly along one wall. Several senior executives were already seated. Coffee cups steamed beside neatly organized folders. Claire took her place confidently. The discussion began smoothly. Market forecasts were reviewed. Strategic opportunities were highlighted. Financial projections exceeded expectations. Claire could almost feel the deal moving closer to completion. Then a senior executive entered carrying a tablet. His expression immediately changed the mood inside the room. He whispered something to the chairman before taking a seat. The chairman studied the screen for several seconds. The room gradually grew quieter. Claire noticed the shift. "Is everything all right?" she asked. The chairman looked up. "There appears to be a developing situation." Claire frowned. "What kind of situation?" Without answering immediately, he turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was a video. The image was unmistakable. The airplane. The first-class cabin. Her own voice. Claire felt her stomach tighten as she watched. The recording. Every detail had been captured clearly. Her request. The silence. Marcus standing and moving seats without protest. The clip ended with him handing Emma her notebook and offering the blue marker. Claire stared at the screen. Below the video, the view count continued climbing. Hundreds of thousands. Then more. Comments filled the page faster than they could be read. The chairman folded his hands. The video has gained significant public attention overnight. Claire struggled to maintain her composure. What does this have to do with today's meeting? Several executives exchanged uncertain glances. The chairman carefully opened a folder resting beside him. That is what we are trying to determine. Sunlight reflected across the conference table. Outside the windows, the city remained bright and beautiful. Yet inside the room, for the first time in years, Claire felt a quiet sense of uncertainty beginning to grow. Claire kept her eyes fixed on the tablet screen even after the video ended. The room remained silent. Around the conference table, executives shifted uneasily in their seats. Some glanced at their phones. Others stared out the windows overlooking Los Angeles. The atmosphere had changed completely. Only 30 minutes earlier, everyone had been discussing growth projections and future opportunities. Now nobody seemed interested in financial forecasts. Claire slowly set the tablet down. "This video does not represent who I am," she said firmly. It was a single moment. The chairman nodded politely. "Perhaps, but public perception can have significant consequences." Before Claire could respond, her phone vibrated again. Then again, and again. Notifications poured across the screen faster than she could read them. Messages from board members. Messages from investors. Requests from journalists. Several major news organizations had already published articles discussing the incident. The video continued spreading across social media platforms at an astonishing pace. Claire opened one message from her communications director. Her expression tightened immediately. Several investors had requested emergency calls. Public relations consultants were recommending a formal statement. Market analysts were beginning to question the company's leadership image. Claire felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had faced difficult situations before. Economic downturns, competitive threats, failed negotiations. But this felt different. There was no spreadsheet capable of solving it. No acquisition strategy. No financial model. The chairman opened the folder resting beside him. There is another matter we need to discuss. Claire looked up. What matter? The chairman slid a document across the table. The final review process for this partnership includes an independent leadership and ethics assessment. Claire frowned. We completed that months ago. An updated review was submitted this morning. The words immediately captured the attention of everyone in the room. Claire picked up the document and began reading. Her confidence faded with every page. The assessment focused on leadership culture, public conduct, and organizational values. The language remained professional and measured. There were no accusations, no emotional statements. Yet every observation carried weight. The document suggested that leadership behavior reflected organizational priorities and that public actions could influence trust across communities served by the partnership. Claire reached the final page and stopped. A signature appeared at the bottom. She stared at the name. Marcus Bennett. The room felt suddenly warmer. Who is Marcus Bennett? She asked. Several executives exchanged looks. One of them leaned forward. You truly do not know? Claire shook her head. The executive exhaled slowly. Marcus Bennett founded one of the largest community healthcare foundations in the country. His organization influences billions of dollars in healthcare funding and community investment projects. Claire blinked. For a moment, she thought she had misunderstood. The man from the airplane. The man carrying a worn backpack. The man she had dismissed so easily. The realization settled over the room like a shadow. Before anyone could speak again, another message appeared on Claire's phone. Pacific Health Alliance had officially suspended final approval of the partnership pending further review. Claire stared at the screen. Months of preparation. Countless meetings. Endless negotiations. Everything had been placed on hold. Outside the conference room, sunlight continued shining across the city as if nothing had changed. Yet inside, Claire felt something slipping beyond her control for the very first time in years. And somewhere else in Los Angeles, Marcus Bennett continued his day completely unaware that the quiet dignity he had shown on an airplane was now exposing truths far more powerful than any business deal. Claire left the conference room carrying the weight of a day she could never have imagined. The hallway outside felt unusually quiet despite the steady movement of executives and assistants passing through the building. Sunlight streamed through enormous glass walls, casting long reflections across the polished floors. Normally, she would have been answering calls, directing teams, and planning her next move. Today, she simply walked. Her phone continued vibrating inside her purse. Messages arrived every few seconds. Investors wanted explanations. Board members wanted emergency meetings. Reporters wanted statements. Claire ignored them all. She stepped onto an outdoor terrace overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Warm afternoon air drifted across the skyline. Far below, traffic flowed through the city as though nothing had changed. Thousands of people moved through their daily lives completely unaware that her carefully constructed world had begun to crack. Claire rested both hands against the railing and stared toward the horizon. For years, she had measured success through numbers. Revenue growth, market share, investment returns. Yet none of those achievements offered comfort now. The image that continued replaying in her mind was not from a boardroom or a shareholder meeting. It was the moment on the airplane when Marcus quietly stood up and moved without complaint. The more she thought about it, the less she understood her own behavior. Meanwhile, several miles away, Marcus Bennett sat inside the same community center he had visited earlier that morning. The building glowed beneath soft yellow lights as evening approached. Teachers organized supplies for the next day. Children laughed while working on art projects at folding tables. The atmosphere felt warm and alive. Marcus listened to a young teacher describe plans for a new after-school health program. He asked questions and offered ideas, taking notes in a worn notebook. No one in the room seemed impressed by titles or influence. They cared only that he listened. A small boy approached carrying a handmade poster covered in colorful drawings. Marcus studied it carefully and smiled. The child's face brightened immediately. The moment lasted only seconds, but it carried a quiet sincerity that could not be manufactured. Back at her hotel, Claire entered the suite and found Emma sitting near the window watching the sunset. Golden light filled the room. The city beyond the glass shimmered beneath the fading sky. Emma looked up. "Did your meeting go well?" Claire paused before answering. "Not exactly." Emma closed her notebook. "Is it because of the man from the airplane?" Claire sat beside her daughter and looked out at the horizon. The sky had turned shades of orange, pink, and deep blue. For several moments, she said nothing. Then she nodded. Emma lowered her eyes. "He seemed nice before anyone knew he was important." The words settled quietly between them. Claire felt something shift inside her. Outside, the sun slowly disappeared behind distant buildings. Shadows stretched across the city. For the first time in a very long time, Claire stopped thinking about what she had lost and began thinking about what she had failed to see. The room remained silent except for the faint sounds of the city below, and in that silence a difficult truth finally began to take shape. The next morning, Los Angeles woke beneath a clear blue sky, but Claire Montgomery felt as though she had not slept at all. The previous day's events continued replaying in her mind. Every conversation, every headline, every uncomfortable realization. Shortly after sunrise, she received an unexpected message from Pacific Health Alliance. A final review meeting had been scheduled. Attendance was limited to key decision-makers and representatives involved in the ethics evaluation process. It was her last opportunity to address the concerns that had placed the partnership on hold. Claire read the message twice before setting down her phone. Deep inside, she already knew this meeting would not be about financial projections or market opportunities. It would be about something far more personal. By late morning, she entered a modern conference center overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Sunlight reflected across the water outside the enormous glass windows. The atmosphere inside was calm and professional. Several executives were already seated around a long, polished table. Folders rested neatly in front of each chair. Claire took her seat quietly. For once, she had no prepared presentation, no carefully rehearsed talking points. She simply waited. A few minutes later, the doors opened. Several Foundation representatives entered first. Then the room became unexpectedly still. Marcus Bennett walked inside. Claire felt her breath catch for a moment. Seeing him again felt entirely different now. He wore the same simple style of clothing. No expensive suit. No display of status. Yet everyone in the room seemed to acknowledge his presence immediately. Not because of authority alone, but because of the respect he had earned. Marcus greeted several people before taking a seat across the table. The meeting began. Reports were reviewed. Questions were asked. Community initiatives were discussed. Leadership standards were examined. Throughout the conversation, Marcus spoke calmly and thoughtfully. He never mentioned the airplane. He never referenced the video. He focused entirely on the responsibilities connected to the partnership. Claire found herself listening more carefully than she ever had before. After nearly an hour, the chairman finally turned toward her. "Before we conclude," he said, "is there anything you would like to add?" The room grew quiet. Claire looked down at her hands before lifting her eyes toward Marcus. Sunlight streamed across the table between them. She drew a slow breath. "Yes," she said softly. Every person in the room turned toward her. Claire stood. "I spent years believing success was measured by achievements, titles, and influence." Her voice remained steady. "But over the last 24 hours, I have been forced to confront something far more important." She paused briefly. "When I met Mr. Bennett on that flight, I judged him before I knew anything about him. I made assumptions based on appearance rather than character. I treated another human being with less respect than he deserved." Silence filled the room. Claire continued, "I am deeply sorry." Her words carried no excuses, no qualifications, no attempt to protect her reputation. Only honesty. Marcus listened quietly. Outside the windows, sunlight danced across the ocean waves. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Thank you for saying that." His response surprised her. There was no anger in his voice. No satisfaction. Only sincerity. Claire looked at him, uncertain. Marcus offered a faint smile. The most important thing about mistakes is what we learn from them. The room remained silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Lighter. Warmer. Several people exchanged thoughtful glances. For the first time since everything began, Claire felt something she had not experienced in days. Not relief. Not victory. Something better. The possibility of growth. And as the waves continued rolling beyond the glass walls, she realized that the man she had once dismissed had already given her something far more valuable than any business deal could ever provide. The meeting concluded shortly after noon, but its impact lingered long after everyone had left the room. Sunlight continued sparkling across the Pacific Ocean outside the conference center as executives slowly gathered their materials and departed. Claire remained seated for a few moments, absorbing everything that had happened. She had entered the building expecting judgment. Instead, she had encountered grace. The realization followed her throughout the afternoon. Later that day, Pacific Health Alliance announced that the partnership review would continue under revised conditions. The project would move forward only if new community healthcare commitments became a central part of the agreement. The decision surprised many observers. Some expected punishment. Others expected retaliation. Instead, the focus shifted towards service, accountability, and meaningful change. Claire studied the proposal in her office that evening. Several initiatives had been recommended. Mobile healthcare units for underserved neighborhoods. Expanded pediatric programs. Scholarships for medical students from disadvantaged communities. Increased investment in community clinics. The recommendations reflected the same values Marcus had spent years supporting. As she read through the details, Claire realized something unexpected. None of the requirements felt unreasonable. In fact, they felt necessary. The next morning, she visited one of the community health centers supported by Marcus's foundation. The facility was modest compared to the corporate buildings she normally occupied. Families filled the waiting area. Nurses greeted patients warmly. Volunteers assisted children with educational activities while parents waited for appointments. The atmosphere felt welcoming and genuine. Claire walked through the building quietly. No cameras followed her. No reporters documented the visit. For once, she was not there as a chief executive. She was there to learn. Near the end of the tour, she noticed Marcus speaking with a group of healthcare workers. He listened attentively as they discussed challenges facing local families. When he noticed Claire approaching, he greeted her with the same calm politeness he had shown on the airplane. Nothing about his demeanor suggested resentment. "Thank you for coming," he said. Claire glanced around the facility. "I should have come a long time ago." Marcus smiled faintly. Most people do not understand a community until they spend time inside it. Together, they continued walking through the center. Parents spoke about healthcare access. Teachers described student needs. Volunteers shared stories about families they served. With each conversation, Claire saw realities she had rarely considered during board meetings and financial reviews. The experience changed her perspective more than any public criticism ever could. As the visit came to an end, they stopped beside a large window overlooking a playground where children laughed beneath the afternoon sun. Claire watched them for several seconds. "You could have made this much harder for me," she said quietly. Marcus looked toward the playground. "That would not have helped anyone." His answer carried a simplicity that made it impossible to forget. Claire nodded slowly. In that moment, she finally understood why people respected him so deeply. His influence did not come from power alone. It came from the choices he made when power was available. And as warm sunlight filled the room and children's laughter drifted through the glass, Claire realized that the future standing before her was no longer about saving a partnership. It was about becoming the kind of leader who deserved one. 3 months later, the memory of that flight had faded from most headlines, but its impact remained woven into countless lives. Summer sunlight bathed Los Angeles in warm gold as communities across the city benefited from new healthcare initiatives, expanded educational programs, and partnerships that reached far beyond corporate boardrooms. Reynolds Health Solutions had changed. New advisory councils had been created. Community leaders were invited into conversations that once happened behind closed doors. Scholarship programs were growing. Mobile clinics traveled into neighborhoods that had long been overlooked. The transformation was not perfect, and Claire Montgomery never claimed it was. Real change required time. But for the first time in years, she measured success differently. One bright Saturday afternoon, Claire and Emma arrived at a community health fair held in a large park near the ocean. Families filled the grassy fields. Children ran between activity booths. Volunteers distributed information and supplies beneath rows of white tents. The air carried the scent of fresh grass and salt from the nearby shoreline. Emma immediately recognized several volunteers she had met during earlier visits and ran ahead with a smile. Claire followed more slowly, taking in the scene around her. Not long ago, she would have viewed an event like this as a public relations opportunity. Now she saw something else. She saw people, real needs, real lives. Across the park, Marcus Bennett stood beneath a shade canopy speaking with nurses, teachers, and local families. He looked exactly the same as he had on the airplane months earlier. Calm, approachable, unconcerned with attention. When Emma spotted him, she hurried across the grass carrying a drawing she had been working on for weeks. Marcus accepted it with genuine interest. The picture showed an airplane flying through bright clouds above a city skyline. He smiled warmly. "This is beautiful." Emma beamed. "I used the blue marker." Marcus laughed softly. "I can tell." Claire watched the exchange from a short distance away. Sunlight filtered through the trees, creating shifting patterns across the ground. The moment felt simple, ordinary, yet somehow more meaningful than any business victory she had ever celebrated. Later that evening, as the event came to an end, families slowly drifted home. Volunteers packed supplies into trucks. The sky turned shades of orange and violet above the Pacific Ocean. Claire and Emma stood near a walking path overlooking the water. In the distance, Marcus continued speaking with a few remaining volunteers before heading toward the parking area. There were no dramatic speeches, no final confrontation, no public declaration. None was needed. Emma slipped her hand into her mother's. Together they watched the final rays of sunlight settle across the waves. The ocean moved gently beneath the fading sky. Seagulls drifted above the shoreline. A cool breeze carried the sounds of laughter from far behind them. Claire thought about how everything had begun with a moment of judgment and how it had ended with understanding. She realized that the most important lesson of all had never been about losing opportunities or protecting reputations. It was about recognizing the dignity of another person before knowing their title, their influence, or their accomplishments. The horizon slowly darkened as day gave way to evening. Beside her, Emma smiled quietly. Ahead of them, the ocean stretched endlessly toward the fading light. And in the peaceful silence that followed, the truth remained clear. Kindness had never been weakness. It had been the strongest thing in the story all along.